Joining me now is Heritage Senior Advisor and Research Fellow Alan Mendenhall. Alan, wonderful to have you on the program. Thank you so much for joining me. Huge celebrations over in America at the weekend for the 250th anniversary. I did note that President Donald Trump, he marked this occasion on the eve of the anniversary with quite a patriotic address at Mount Rushmore, declaring that the United States is the most exceptional nation ever to exist, and he's vowed that it would never be a communist country. Here's a bit of what he had to say.
You can be loyal to Karl Marx, or you can be loyal to America. You can be a communist, or you can be a patriot. You cannot be both. As for those who peddle Marxist lies about our heritage, who tell our children that we live on stolen land or that our heroes were oppressors, they're doing something much worse than slandering our past. They are slandering and attacking our future. Not going to let that happen.
Alan, is he right? I mean, what version of history is being pushed by those, particularly on the left?
Well, I think he's right. And I think America is great because of a combination of things, because of the people and because of the governing institutions. So if you don't have one, you don't have the other. So I guess you could say it's one thing, which is a symbiotic interplay between the people and the governing institutions. And what do I mean by that? If you take our Constitution and try to plop it down somewhere else in some other part of the globe, the people that it would govern wouldn't operate under the same circumstances that we do. So in that sense, our Constitution's not a self-executing blueprint that can just be transplanted to some other place with equal effect. And it's because there is like a deeply ingrained political culture in the United States. And we value procedural legitimacy, we value rule of law, we value restraint. And even when we have fundamental conflicts, which we've had many, many times, we typically dispute them, argue them. We exercise our rights within a constitutional order. We litigate our conflicts in the courts. We mobilize majorities through electoral processes, and we amend the Constitution when necessary. So there's a commitment to playing by the rules of the game. And even when the outcomes are unwelcome, I think both left and right feel as if they lose frequently. We always are going to have some sort of cultural internalization of limited government and separation of powers and popular sovereignty. And so, yes, when you try to insert something like Marxism into that political culture, you're going to see fundamental changes in the culture. And I believe that the president's right. I actually believe that that some of this is derivative of Marxism. As somebody that has a PhD in English and had to go through all varieties of literary theory, had to read Marx and Engels, had to read the classical Marxists that talked about histories of struggle between oppressors and oppressed, had to read the sort of next permutation of Marxism, people like Gramsci who, they're like, okay, well, the workers didn't revolt like Marx predicted, so let's shift our focus to culture. And they did, and they looked at how power circulates through schools and universities and media and churches and entertainment. And they tried to capture those institutions to counter what they believed was some type of cultural hegemony. And at any rate, you can trace this genealogy, I think, pretty well through the New Left and through critical theory. And you get sort of modern identity politics where the oppressor-oppressed framework now is pulled through the prism of race and gender and sexuality. And I do think that poses a fundamental threat to the mores and habits and traditions and cultures of the United States that do adhere to what is fundamentally sort of a British constitutional culture, but also this sort of a Western tradition.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I want to ask you then about this modern identity politics, because I was reading that some on the left in particular, they don't believe that July 4 is the real anniversary over in the US. They prefer 1619, the year that the first slaves arrived. And I just wonder how that's translating, I guess, into the next generation. I mean, the left will have a mind of their own and they decide what they want to. But what are, say, for instance, young kids being taught in the classrooms about America's history? Is there that threat of this modern ideological indoctrination that you referenced?
There's certainly a threat. It's difficult to say what American kids learn in school because we don't have a single national curriculum. What students learn depends on a state by state basis, but even within each state, it depends on which school district you're in. So here in Alabama, where I am, you might have a school district in Montgomery or Birmingham that learns one thing that's very different from a school district in Huntsville or Mobile or Auburn or Tuscaloosa. And so we don't have a lot of uniformity, but I can say from personal experience and from observation serving on our state textbook committee that there is a sense of grievance culture that trickles into the curriculum. I personally send my kids to a classical Christian school, and we have them learning on the trivium, and they go through a grammar stage and a logic stage and a rhetoric stage. And the focus is on wisdom, and they study Bible and theology and literature and history and math and science, and they get a sort of a broad range of humanities. But what I think is really important about that is they learn to look at political events, contemporary political events, over the course of centuries, and I think they're better able to contextualize the particular political moment that we're in. Whereas, a lot of students sort of look at the 1960s as if that were the American founding, and they have no historical memory beyond that. And of course, if you think that that either slavery or just the abuses under the civil rights movement are the only story America has to tell, of course, you're going to come away with a very negative history. But America has a wonderful history, and in particular in this area of slavery, I think America has a lot to be proud of. The West did not invent slavery, but it played a leading role in abolishing the transatlantic slave trade and promoting worldwide abolition. And that was really, Britain and America leading the way there. The Atlantic slave trade was a horrible thing. Slavery is an ancient institution. It existed in Mesopotamia. It existed in Egypt and Greece and China and Africa and the Islamic world in the medieval period. And yes, it migrated to the United States, but that's also where abolition occurred. It was influenced by some British people like William Wilberforce and Enlightenment ideals of natural rights and human equality and liberty and Christian teachings about the inherent dignity of every person. So some of these ideas that were prevalent at the founding were in fact the very ideas that enabled abolition to happen, that enabled the demise of slavery. So I think America can be very proud of what it did to end slavery, to end its perpetuation across the globe, in fact.
Yeah, look, I mean, absolutely. It's such an extensive history when you think about it. You mentioned just before that America does have a lot to be proud of, and I'm very curious of this given it's a 250th anniversary. This is an incredible, incredible milestone. In your view, what makes America great?
Well, I think America represents almost a synthesis of many different traditions in the West. So it's almost like the culmination of many different Western traditions. And this isn't my idea. I'm getting this from one of my favorite thinkers is Russell Kirk. And he has this book called Roots of the American Order. And back in like 2018 or 19, I held this conference on the campus of Faulkner University, and we handed out this book to all the students, and they all had to read a different city. So Kirk says, okay, we have 5 cities basically that influence American civilization. It's Jerusalem, Athens, Rome, London, and Philadelphia. Philadelphia being sort of the American culmination. But from Jerusalem, he says the ancient Hebrews, the Old Testament prophets, you get the 10 Commandments, you get the notion of a transcendental law, you get the notion of human sinfulness and the need for virtue, the natural law, and the idea that law is antecedent to human promulgation, natural law. From Athens, you get reason and mixed government, ideas of republican virtue. From Rome, you get rule of law, republicanism. And then London, of course, you get the British tradition, constitutionalism, common law, representative government, the rights of Englishmen. And you have that tradition, Magna Carta, Petition of Rights, Bill of Rights, Locke. And then America, you get Philadelphia. And you really do get this synthesis with the written constitution, a federal republic, ordered liberty. And we've maintained that framework now for 250 years. And that's something to really be proud of. And I truly believe that we have taken a lot of what was the best in the Western tradition and enacted it here in the United States. And of course, a lot of that's fragile. We're at risk of losing some of it. But because we have had 250 years of workable government under these principles, we've got momentum on our side.
And that's so important, especially in this ever-changing world, the geopolitical, threats that we live in. That the fact that America has been able to uphold that framework and it's still holding steady in 2026, I think it's much to be admired. And I think America really is an incredible country. There's so much to be proud of, and so much to be proud of the next generation coming through. I think you're absolutely spot on, Alan. I was having a look at the celebration across the weekend, and I've got to say America knows how to put on the fireworks. I mean, it was just incredible to see, and I loved seeing the Capitol lit up. I just thought it was absolutely gorgeous. I want to ask you, because it's an interesting time for America as well. Obviously, there's the backdrop of the war in Iran. There's a cost of living crisis, as there is across the world. Was it is it still a divided America, even though such a celebration brings people together?
Sure, I think it's a divided America. In fact, I think the red state, blue state divide has become even more bifurcated in the last, I don't know, say decade. And it's not something that I see easing up anytime soon. But I also see a lot more pride. It's different because in my view, I feel as if the left has begun to sort of despise America's traditions and despise America's culture, and to treat it as just a long train of abuses. I'm borrowing words from the Declaration here, but they really dislike America, and a lot of them even, in fact, hate America, and so they're not going to be expected to celebrate America, and that's disappointing because the very governing institutions and traditions that we have are what allow them to freely express themselves in that way, in that public way. And they enjoy all these freedoms to hate America. And it's because, these freedoms exist, and I believe they take them for granted. One thing I used to tell my students, because I was a college professor for many, many years before I came to the think tank world, is I would hear them talk about privilege all the time. And I really strongly disliked the word privilege. And I said, why are you using that word? It's got such a negative connotation. What if you, instead of saying privilege, what if you said blessings? Because blessings are also things that are unearned, but they involve sort of a corollary, which is a responsibility, a duty. To whom much is given, much is required. So blessings suggest, yes, you have something, you have an inheritance that you didn't earn. You were born into this country, and you should not take it for granted. You should try to make sure that everybody gets to enjoy those privileges and rights and all the rest. These are blessings. This isn't privilege in the negative sense. This is privilege in the positive sense. These are things that we want to see other people get to enjoy, not things that we should just bash.
No, I totally agree. And we just saw some of those wonderful celebrations on the screen as you were talking, Alan. And it got me thinking, because you did say, and I totally agree with you, that there are many on the left who hate America. And I think that is the case actually across the world. I think we find ourselves in a reality where there are some whose views are so extreme that they hate the West in general, which is such a shame, because I actually think the West is the best. And we are very privileged to live in Western nations. So with that in mind, what does it mean to be an American in 2026?
Well, I think being American in 2026, I could answer this in different ways. I could say what it is, and I could say what it ought to be. And I think what it is a moment of conflict. It's a moment of tension. But what it ought to be, and what I think it can be, is a return to two foundational principles from the Declaration. One is equality, which is the notion that we all have these God-given rights, and the other is popular sovereignty. I know a lot of people, even on the right, who decry populism and say, well, populism's bad. But I like to say, well, you know what? there's actually a very principled reason for populism in the American experiment, and it's that we have consent of the governed. This notion that government gets its power from the people. I mean, if you look at historically where sovereignty, the notion of sovereignty is a philosophical concept. I mean, before the United States, where we have we the people, first three words of our Constitution, which is meant to say sovereignty resides with the people. It's a very, I guess, contractarian idea. It comes out of the social contract theories of Locke and Hobbes and all the others that are doing social contract theory. But before that, you've got Blackstone writing in England about absolute sovereignty resides totally in Parliament, and then before sovereignty resides in Parliament, it resides in the monarch. So it's a very different thing to say that sovereignty resides with the people in the United States, and that's a key thing, that governments derive their just powers from the consent of the governed. It really is the people who control the government and not vice versa. And we're, if anything, at risk of losing that through our division. I think that what we ought to be in 2026 is a people who remember who we are. My grandmother had Alzheimer's at the end of her life. It was terrible. She didn't recognize people. She couldn't remember pieces of her life. And it was horrible just to see her in that type of decline. And I think countries can go through that as well. And the last thing I would want to see is America suffer from some version of political, cultural, historical Alzheimer's. It would be terrible. So what we ought to be doing in 2026 is remembering who we are, remembering, where our government derives its powers and what authority we have as the people to represent and to control our government and to exercise popular sovereignty.
I think that's so well put. You're right. It is. What does it mean to be an American? Remember who you are. Remember your foundations. Remember your roots, and remember that you do live in one of the most prosperous, if not the most prosperous nation in the entire world. I think it's absolutely very well put. Alan, I want to ask you a little bit of domestic politics, if I may. I was reading an interesting article in the UK Telegraph, actually, and it said that sources close to Donald Trump say he is anxious about the looming midterm elections and is even weighing up who is around him, who's an asset and who is a liability. When you hear him speak in public, he seems very confident, and that's the way that Donald Trump's always been, that he's confident that, maybe the polling doesn't suggest that he's the most popular president right now. How do you see this playing out between now and the midterms? His popularity has obviously slumped. What do you think will happen? I mean, how do you see it going?
Well, I do think his popularity remains strong within his own base. And so, politics is all about amassing majorities, and he's been pretty good at doing that. Now, the balance of power is delicate for Republicans in particular. 218 to 212 in the House, and the Senate's tight too, 53-47. The Democrats just could, gain 4 seats to win the Senate. And there's some vulnerable seats. Susan Collins is one. I think she'll pull it off. She's facing Graham Plattner, who is the sort of the socialist Democrat with the Nazi tattoo. And but you've got an open seat. Tom Tillis is retiring in North Carolina. You've got the situation in Georgia where John Ossoff, who is a Democrat, could possibly lose a seat. You've got tough elections in Ohio and Alaska and Texas. Of course, everyone's looking at Texas because of the James Tallarico guy, but I think Ken Paxton will handily defeat him. I hesitate to make predictions, but I think the Republicans hold on to the Senate. I don't know about the House. I really don't know. There are just too many just districts at risk in Nebraska, Arizona, Iowa, New York, just different places. And it's hard for me to make predictions in those spaces. But if I were a betting man, I would say the House probably goes Democratic while the Republicans retain control of the Senate. But, in politics, a week is like a year. So who knows what could happen by the time the fall rolls around.
Yeah, no, that's a very, very good point. How much has the Iran war had an impact on Donald Trump?
I think it's probably had a pretty negative impact. No one wants to see the Iranian regime in place. Of course, nobody's rooting for that. on the other hand, I think Americans had grown skeptical about sort of foreign policy adventurism, and they'd had a bad taste in their mouth after Iraq and Afghanistan and other conflicts abroad, even Russia, Ukraine. And so I also think gas prices were a big one. I mean, gas prices jumped a ton for months and months and months. They're coming down now that the Strait of Hormuz is open. But when people feel inflation, which we had headline inflation increase, and that's energy and food costs that are pulled into headline inflation. So that's what people feel. Even if core inflation remains below 3%, what consumers are feeling is that 4.2%. They're feeling the energy and the gas prices, and also people have short-term memories. So we forget that, inflation was 9.1% under Biden at one point. And at that time, gas prices were over $5 because that was 2022, and 2022 was 4 years ago. We care about what's happening now. But I think that it's a combination of things. I think it's a combination of just sort of disenchantment with foreign interventionism and high prices at the pump. But again, as I say, politics in 1 week is like a year in politics. So if gas prices continue to come down, inflation gets under control, we could see a lot of surprises come November, come the fall, and that could lean in the Republicans' favor, because right now the Democrats are basically leaning on those things. They're leaning on gas prices. They're leaning on inflation because they have nothing else. The stock markets are breaking records every single week, it seems like. We've broken so many records this year, it's hard to keep track. I think there have been over 20 records between the S&P 500 and the Dow and the NASDAQ. So, people's 401ks, people are, and their investments are doing very well. I guess the issue for a lot of voters is that many of them aren't the type of people who are able to invest because they're paying their mortgage, they're paying car payments, and they don't have that extra income to invest. And so those are the people that Republicans need to reach.
Yeah, absolutely. You're right, though. The Democrats, they'll cling on to anything, and that's all that they've got at this point. But look, a long time between now and November, so anything is certainly possible. Alan Mendenhall, wonderful to have you on the show. Thank you so much for your insights. I really enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.